Back on the line with us, Stephen Miles. He is the director of Win Without War at the Center for International Policy, the website for the Center for International Policy, CIPonline.org. You can tweet him at SPMiles42 or CIP Online. Stephen, welcome to the program.
Hey, good to be on, Tom.
Thanks for joining us today. We had an American soldier killed in Syria a day or three ago, and this, Congress never declared war on Syria. Congress never declared war, frankly, on any place in that region. We haven't had an actual war declaration since 1941. But here we are. We're in the middle of this war, and then on top of that, it sure looks to me like Trump is putting together a war cabinet. He's getting rid of people who are more, who actually have military experience, actually know the horrors of war, and replacing them with, essentially draft dodgers like John Bolton and himself, and Trump himself, and Mike Pence and others. What's your take on what's going on here, or what do you think is actually going on? I mean, you're a graduate of the London School of Economics and Tulane University, of academic expertise on humanitarian interventions and Middle Eastern politics. What are you seeing happening here?
Well, Tom, I think you hit the nail on the head. By all appearances, Donald Trump is putting together a war cabinet. This is a president who not only inherited a number of American wars, but in every theater of combat that he inherited, he's doubled down on U.S. war making. He sent more troops to Afghanistan. He's increased our military operations in Iraq and Syria. He's sent more troops into places like Somalia, and we're seeing a continuation of war in places like Yemen. So this president, already on war footing, is now putting around him people like John Bolton, who look out at the world. They see problems like North Korea. They see challenges like the U.S. has with Iran, and they see only one solution: the U.S. military. They see war as the solution. They see regime change as the solution, and it should be troubling to all Americans that these are now who the president is surrounding himself with.
What would be the appropriate response to what's going on in the Middle East, for example? Or, I mean, Syria, arguably, on the edge of the Middle East, but you know what I'm talking about, the whole region, and Northern Africa, for that matter. I mean, we've got problems in Libya going on right now. Mm-hmm. So back to you, Stephen.
Yeah, it's worth noting that the president's doing all this right as we're marking the 15th anniversary of the start of the Iraq War back in 2003. Now, there's very few people in the world who look at what George W. Bush did and what's happened in the intervening 15 years and said, the Iraq War was a good idea. That's how we should do American foreign policy. But that seems to be the lesson that this president is now putting forward. He's surrounding, again, himself with people like John Bolton, people like Mike Pompeo, people like Gina Haspel, folks who not only do not view the Iraq War as a problem, but they view it as an example for how we should conduct American foreign policy going forward. So you have to ask yourself how this president, who ran an election claiming that he was against Iraq, claiming that he was against stupid wars, has done nothing but govern the absolute opposite way. I mean, I know it won't be a shock to people that Donald Trump has a tenuous relationship with the truth and is willing to change his mind from one minute to the next, but here his actions are clearly speaking louder than any words he's ever uttered. He's doubling, tripling down on war, and it's looking like he's thinking about the Iraq War and thinking that's what we need more of.
Back in 2003, 2004, as the Iraq War was starting to unravel, well, actually, I mean, the war lasted a few weeks. It just took us a couple of weeks to take down Saddam Hussein and seize the country. Everything from that point till now, in my opinion, has been an occupation. And occupations tend not to work all that well. I mean, just ask the British soldiers who tried to occupy North America in 1776. But one of the stories that we heard as the occupation was unraveling, as they were looting the national museums, as they were, burning buildings down, as people were being killed in the streets indiscriminately after L. Paul Bremer had come in and laid off anybody who had any affiliation with Saddam Hussein's political party, the Ba'ath Party, and fired 500,000 people in the military who got to go home and keep their guns, was that Bremer and Rumsfeld were trying to do an economic experiment. They wanted to have, there had never been a country in the world where libertarianism had successfully been tried. And Rumsfeld and Bremer believed, and had apparently convinced George W. Bush, that if they got rid of government, if they got rid of all regulations, if they got rid of rules that protected unions, if they got rid of rules that had to do with politics and the Ba'ath Party and all that kind of stuff, if they just basically did, you know, and shut down all the state-run industries, which represented half of Iraq's economy at the time, that if they did all that, that the free market would blossom, 1,000 flowers would bloom, tens of thousands of small businesses would be started by Iraqis, and you would see the growth of an economy and a middle class like you'd never seen before, because Milton Friedman told us this, and it has to be true. You know, within a few years, I think that they stopped talking like that or even thinking like that, and I'm not sure what, you know, in retrospect, these guys are thinking or saying. But you know, there was that clear economic experiment as a large piece of the decision to invade Iraq and to maintain a presence in Iraq, along with Dick Cheney wanting the oil. Are we seeing that same kind of economic, first of all, your thoughts on what I just said, and secondly, if you don't disagree with me, are we seeing that same kind of economic and ideological positioning behind these wars, or is this just, hey, we broke the Middle East and now we don't know how to fix it other than dropping bombs on people?
Well, you know, look, I need to start where you were, which is that we were sold a bill of goods as the American public on the Iraq War. Various parts of the administration of George W. Bush had all sorts of reasons why they wanted to go into Iraq, why they wanted to invade and occupy that country, why they wanted to change things. It wasn't weapons of mass destruction. It wasn't any sort of liberating of the Iraqi people. It was to pursue a radical agenda dressed up in disguise as something else. And different members of the administration had different agendas. But you're absolutely right. This was not anything that the American public was told. And that is something we're seeing again, right? That is a question we have to ask ourselves about why there are so many organizations in this town dedicated to trying to make the case for violent regime change with Iran. Why are there so many think tanks and experts and others who are interested in this and not just analyzing the problem, but have the same clear, tired example of what we should do, violently overthrow the regime and pursue an Iraq-style remake of Iran. Mostly they're the same folks who were behind the Iraq War, and again, we know that they were being disingenuous the last time. But the danger really comes when people in the government, people in the administration, who have these ideas are put into positions of power and then given the opportunity to politicize intelligence, to falsify intelligence, to lie to the American public, right? That's what we saw time and time again with the Iraq War. And so when you look at somebody like Mike Pompeo and you look what he's already done with the politicization of the CIA, with the manipulation of the way the CIA interacts with the media to spread misinformation, what they're doing right now to try to politicize the agency's duty to tell the American public about who Gina Haspel is, given her nomination, what they're doing to gloss over her role of torture, what they're doing to hide the realities of what she did as part of the torture program, you have to conclude that this is a person who should not be put in a position of authority in which they can make another series of misleading statements, of lies, of falsification that might end up putting our country in yet another war that 15 years later you and I will be talking about how much of a disaster it was.
Yeah, she also oversaw the destruction of the tapes, the torture tapes for the CIA that apparently she was supervising, or at least that's what's being reported. I mean, we'll find out when she goes before the Senate. But to what extent are we doing this on behalf of other actors? I mean, Iran and Israel have a serious problem.
Sure, and in this case, Saudi Arabia is a huge player. You know, we're seeing right now the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, Mohammed bin Salman, who's on a tour around the country. He's meeting with members of Congress. He obviously met with the president. He's now going out west to meet with Hollywood moguls and Silicon Valley bigwigs, executives, investors. So, you know, what the Crown Prince said the other day was that the Iranian regime was worse than Hitler. This is a man who's trying to use the fawning adulation we've seen from folks like Donald Trump for him to achieve his political ends in some sort of regional confrontation. That's a battle that the U.S. has no business being in the middle of, and we should be doing a whole lot more.
Not a good thing.
Yeah.
Stephen Miles, Director of Win Without War at the Center for International